I'm Mackenzie Wilson, 32, standing in my faded jeans and worn sweater inside Prestige National Bank. Despite the millions in my accounts, nobody would guess it from my appearance. My brother-in-law Bradley works here as a manager, the same man who spent years looking down on me while elevating my sister Sarah to his elite social circle. He spots me from across the marble floor, his handsome face instantly twisting into a sneer. I take a deep breath, knowing what's coming. If only he knew who I really was. Before I dive into what happened next, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story unfolds. Sarah and I grew up in a modest home in Michigan. Our parents owned a small hardware store that barely kept us afloat, but they prioritized love over luxury. Dad would say, "Girls, wealth isn't what's in your wallet, it's what's in your heart." Mom would nod in agreement while patching our hand-me-downs. Those simple lessons shaped me, but Sarah always yearned for more. When I was 22 and Sarah 20, our father was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. Mom had already been battling lupus for years. Their medical bills began to mount, insurance covering less than half. I was halfway through my computer science degree at Michigan State, while Sarah was pursuing business at an expensive private university. "I can't drop out now," Sarah protested when I suggested we both take a break to help our parents. "This degree is my ticket out. Besides, you're the nurturing one." So I left college to run the store and care for our parents. For 3 years, I worked 16-hour days, splitting time between inventory management and hospital visits. Dad passed first, then Mom 6 months later. Sarah attended both funerals, flying in and out the same day to minimize disruption to her studies. After graduation, Sarah landed an internship at a prestigious financial firm in New York. There, she met Bradley Thompson, handsome, ambitious, and from old money. Their courtship was brief, their wedding lavish. I sold my only valuable possession, Mom's vintage pearl necklace, to afford the bridesmaid dress Sarah insisted upon. "Just try to look presentable," she'd said, eyeing my drugstore makeup and self-trimmed hair. Bradley's family is very particular. At the wedding, Bradley's mother mistook me for waitstaff. When corrected, she'd smiled tightly and said, "Oh, how quaint to have the shopkeeper's sister in the bridal party." Sarah never defended me. After their honeymoon, Sarah transformed completely. Her Midwestern accent disappeared, replaced by the same affected tone Bradley's family used. She began referring to our childhood as that unfortunate period before college. Our parents' struggles became an embarrassing anecdote at dinner parties. Meanwhile, I was drowning in inherited debt from the store and medical bills. Yet something unexpected happened during those years running the shop. I'd created inventory management software to simplify our operations. Several local businesses had noticed and asked to use it. In my spare time, I refined the system, adding features they requested. One night, working late after closing, I had a revelation. The software I'd built could solve problems for small businesses everywhere. I sold the hardware store, paid off the most pressing debts, and used the remaining $5,000 to formally launch my software company, Modest Merchant. For 5 years, I lived in a tiny studio apartment, eating ramen and working 20-hour days. I hired hungry, brilliant programmers who believed in the vision. We expanded from inventory management to complete business solutions for small enterprises. While Sarah posted Instagram photos from the Amalfi Coast and the Maldives, I was coding until sunrise. 2 months ago, a major tech corporation offered $800 million for Modest Merchant. After ensuring my employees would be taken care of with generous packages, I accepted. Overnight, I went from scraping by to having more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Yet I changed nothing about my lifestyle. I kept my modest apartment, drove my 15-year-old Honda, and wore the same rotation of jeans and sweaters. The money wasn't real to me yet, and truthfully, I didn't want it to change who I'd become. I hadn't told Sarah or Bradley about the sale. Our communication had dwindled to obligatory birthday texts and occasional holiday gatherings where Bradley would corner me with questions like, "Still doing that little computer thing? Ever think about getting a real career with benefits?" Last week, Sarah called, a rare occurrence. "We're having a dinner party Saturday for some of Bradley's colleagues. You should come." Her tone suggested this was a generous act of charity. "Are you sure?" "Last time. Just don't wear those awful sneakers." 7 o'clock. "Don't bring anything. Your store-bought wine is always embarrassing." After hanging up, I realized I needed cash for some shopping before the dinner. My new wealth existed mostly in digital form, with only a small checking account for daily expenses. Which is how I found myself at Prestige National Bank that fateful Thursday morning, about to collide with Bradley's world in a way neither of us could have anticipated. Prestige National Bank stood like a temple of wealth in downtown Manhattan, all gleaming marble and soaring columns. I'd passed it hundreds of times, but never entered. My modest banking needs were served by a simple online account and the ATM near my apartment. As I pushed through the heavy bronze doors, I felt immediately out of place. The cavernous main floor buzzed with hushed, important conversations. Men in bespoke suits and women in designer dresses glided across Italian marble, their expressions suggesting they were conducting transactions far more significant than my planned $100 withdrawal. The security guard gave me a suspicious once-over, his gaze lingering on my scuffed boots and the coffee stain on my sleeve. I'd spilled it rushing out the door and hadn't bothered changing, a decision I was now regretting. "Can I help you?" he asked, emphasis suggesting I might be lost. "I'm just here for a withdrawal," I replied, clutching my ancient leather wallet. He pointed to a row of teller windows where a modest line had formed. I nodded thanks and took my place behind a woman whose diamond earrings probably cost more than everything I owned, or at least everything I appeared to own. As I waited, I observed the bank's operations with fascination. Regular customers stood in line while others, clearly preferred clients, were escorted directly to private offices. The wealth disparity was built into the very architecture of the place, with velvet ropes and frosted glass separating the banking castes. Near a cluster of offices, I spotted Bradley. He looked exactly as he had at Christmas, expensive haircut, perfect teeth, posture that screamed old money confidence. He was chatting animatedly with an elderly couple, his sales smile firmly in place. I considered leaving before he saw me, but it was too late. His eyes flicked in my direction, registered my presence, and narrowed slightly. He whispered something to a colleague, nodding in my direction. The other banker glanced over, his expression a mixture of curiosity and amusement. My cheeks burned. I knew that look. It was the same one Bradley gave the waitstaff when they brought him the wrong vintage. I'd experienced Bradley's condescension for years, at holiday gatherings where he'd quiz me about my cute little business while checking stock prices on his phone, at Sarah's birthday where he'd loudly wondered if I could really afford the modest gift I'd brought, at their housewarming where he'd introduced me to his friends as Sarah's sister who never quite found her path. The line inched forward. Bradley finished with his clients and disappeared into an office. Maybe I'd get lucky and complete my transaction without interaction. But luck had never been my strong suit. After 15 minutes of waiting while watching VIPs breeze past, I reached the front of the line. The young teller smiled professionally, asking how she could help. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, Bradley's voice boomed from behind me. "Mackenzie, what a surprise seeing you here." I turned to find him standing uncomfortably close, cologne suffocating in its expensive intensity. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, Bradley." "Linda, I'll handle this," he told the teller, who nodded and stepped back. He turned to me with exaggerated concern. "What brings you to this part of town?" "Car trouble again." The last time my Honda had broken down near their Hamptons house, Bradley had made a show of calling his mechanic, then lectured me for an hour about investing in reliability. I just need to make a withdrawal, I said quietly, aware of people watching. From which account? His voice was louder than necessary, theatrical in its customer service tone. My checking account. Just $100. His eyebrows shot up, and he let out a small scoff that drew attention from nearby customers. $100? You came all the way to a private bank for that. I kept my voice level. It was on my way. On your way to where? The thrift shop. He chuckled at his own joke, glancing around to see who was appreciating his wit. I felt my spine stiffen. Could you please just process my withdrawal? Bradley looked at me as if I'd asked him to shine my shoes. You know, ATMs exist for these smaller transactions. This bank typically handles more substantial matters. Several customers were openly watching now. A woman in a Chanel suit whispered to her companion. Bradley was putting on a show, and I was the entertainment. Bradley leaned against the counter, deliberately casual, deliberately loud. So tell me, Mac, people still call you that childish nickname, right? How's the little software thing going? Sarah mentioned you were still trying to make that work. Each word was precisely calculated to diminish. My successful company, which had just sold for nearly $1 billion, reduced to a little software thing. My chosen name, Mac, which I'd gone by since college, rendered childish. It's going fine, I replied, wanting only to complete my transaction and escape. Fine? Just fine. Bradley's voice rose further, ensuring everyone within 20 feet could hear. You know, I always tell Sarah she should offer you a position at her event planning company. Something entry-level, of course, but with room to grow. My sister's event planning company consisted of her organizing dinner parties for Bradley's colleagues' wives and calling herself an entrepreneur on Instagram. I appreciate the thought, but I'm doing well with my business. Bradley laughed, the sound sharp and theatrical. Well? You're wearing the same sweater you had on at Christmas 3 years ago. Your shoes look like they've hiked the Appalachian Trail. And you're here for $100 withdrawal, which suggests to me that, well, is a significant overstatement. Heat crawled up my neck. A small crowd had gathered, pretending to fill out deposit slips while eavesdropping. The security guard was watching with interest. Even the tellers had paused their work. My appearance doesn't reflect my company's success, I said quietly. No? Let's see, ancient Honda, apartment in, what was it, Queens, and clothes from the clearance rack. Meanwhile, Sarah is redecorating our Aspen house and just ordered her second Birkin this year. He adjusted his gold cufflinks, a gift from Sarah last Christmas, purchased with his money. Seems pretty reflective to me. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. Bradley had always been cruel, but this public display was beyond anything he'd attempted before. I wondered if something had happened at work, some blow to his ego that he needed to offset by crushing mine. You know, he continued, voice dripping with false concern, Sarah worries about you. She says you never really recovered from dropping out of college. That you're stuck in some extended adolescence, playing with computers instead of building a real career. The betrayal stung. Sarah had struggled with our upbringing, yes, but I never thought she'd weaponize my sacrifices against me. I'd left school to care for our dying parents while she continued her education. That choice had altered the trajectory of my life, but not in the way they assumed. I don't need career advice, Bradley. I just need a withdrawal. $100, he repeated mockingly. What's that for? Ramen for the month. Several onlookers chuckled. A balding man in an expensive suit smirked openly. Bradley leaned closer, his voice carrying clearly. You know what the minimum balance requirement is for a standard account at this bank? $10,000. For preferred clients? $100,000. For private banking? $2 million. Each number was emphasized to underscore my perceived poverty. And you're in here, holding up the line, for $100. The line behind me had indeed grown. People checked watches and shifted impatiently. I don't see why this is taking so long, I said. Bradley's smile turned predatory. Well, this is a place of business, not charity. We don't usually serve. He paused for maximum effect, beggars. The word hung in the air like a slap. Several gasps punctuated the silence that followed. Even the most discreet eavesdroppers were now openly staring. I'm not a beggar, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm a customer. Are you, though? Let's check that account. Bradley turned to the computer, making a show of typing dramatically. Wilson. Mackenzie. Here we are. Checking account balance. $342.16. He announced the figure like an auctioneer revealing a disappointing opening bid. I felt dizzy with humiliation. Yes, my daily expenses account was modest, but my wealth wasn't defined by that particular balance. Well, technically, I suppose you are a customer, Bradley continued. In the same way someone who orders a glass of water is a restaurant patron. His colleagues had gathered now, uncomfortable smiles plastered on their faces. One woman looked genuinely embarrassed on my behalf. Is there a problem here? A tall man in an impeccable suit approached. From his demeanor and the immediate straightening of everyone's posture, I identified him as the bank manager. Bradley's smile widened. No problem, Mr. Harrington. Just helping my sister-in-law with a modest transaction. Mr. Harrington's eyes assessed me, taking in my casual clothes and obviously out-of-place presence. I see. Perhaps I can be of assistance. That's really not necessary, Bradley interjected. She's just making a small withdrawal. Very small. More knowing chuckles from the audience he'd cultivated. I'd had enough. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been judged by their appearance, every woman whose accomplishments had been diminished, every individual humiliated for their perceived economic status. Actually, I said, raising my voice slightly, I would appreciate speaking with the manager. Privately, please. Bradley rolled his eyes dramatically. Mr. Harrington is extremely busy with important clients. I'm sure we can handle your $100 without troubling him. It's no trouble, Mr. Harrington said smoothly, though his expression suggested otherwise. Bradley waved dismissively. She's just wasting everyone's time now. Let me finish this transaction so we can all get back to meaningful business. Mr. Harrington hesitated, clearly torn between professional courtesy and efficient use of his time. I looked him directly in the eye. 2 minutes of your time. Please. Something in my tone must have registered. He nodded curtly. Very well. This way, please. As I followed him toward a small office, Bradley called after us. Don't worry, we'll still have that $100 waiting when you're done. Might even throw in a lollipop like they do at the regular banks. More laughter. I kept walking, back straight, eyes forward. The real battle was just beginning. Mr. Harrington's office was small compared to the grand private banking suites visible through glass walls further inside the bank. He gestured to a chair across from his modest desk, his expression professional but impatient. How can I help you, Ms. Wilson? I understand you're here for a withdrawal. Yes, but not from the account my brother-in-law referenced. I reached into my bag and retrieved my phone. I'd like to access my private account. His expression didn't change. Clearly, he'd heard similar claims from those trying to appear more affluent than they were. Do you have your private banking credentials with you? I unlocked my phone, opened my banking app, and entered a sequence of passwords and authentication codes before passing it to him. I believe this should clarify things. Mr. Harrington glanced at the screen, his professional mask slipping for just a moment as his eyes widened. He quickly scrolled through the information, then looked up at me with completely transformed attention. Ms. Wilson, I apologize for the confusion. I wasn't aware we were serving you today. His tone had shifted from condescension to deference so quickly it was almost comical. That's entirely my fault, I said evenly. I should have made an appointment with my usual private banker, but I was in the neighborhood and thought a small withdrawal would be simple enough. Of course. He was already reaching for his phone. Let me call Mr. Atkinson immediately. He handles our most exclusive clients personally. That won't be necessary for a simple transaction, but I would appreciate some discretion. He nodded vigorously. Absolute discretion. However, for transactions of your magnitude, we do have special protocols. I suppressed a smile. I understand. Lead the way. As we exited his office, I could feel the weight of stares. Bradley was still at the teller station, watching with narrowed eyes as Mr. Harrington guided me not back to the regular line, but toward the private banking section behind the velvet rope. Mr. Harrington? Bradley called out, confusion evident in his voice. Is everything all right? Perfectly fine, Mr. Thompson, the manager replied without stopping. Just assisting Ms. Wilson with her banking needs. Bradley hurried to intercept us, his face a mixture of confusion and annoyance. I can handle my sister-in-law's transaction. There's no need to trouble yourself. Mr. Harrington didn't even slow down. Ms. Wilson requires our private banking services. Mr. Atkinson is being notified of her arrival. Private banking? Bradley repeated, laughing nervously. There must be some mistake. We continued past him toward a secluded area of the bank where the marble seemed shinier, the leather chairs deeper, and the conversations even more hushed. A security guard nodded respectfully and opened a glass door for us. Bradley followed, increasingly agitated. Mr. Harrington, this is ridiculous. I know my sister-in-law's financial situation intimately. She runs a failing software startup from a studio apartment. Neither of us acknowledged him as a distinguished older man approached, hand extended. Ms. Wilson, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Thomas Atkinson, head of private client services. I don't believe we've had the honor of meeting in person before. I shook his hand. Most of my banking is handled electronically, Mr. Atkinson. Your team has been excellent. You know her. Bradley blurted, his composure cracking. Mr. Atkinson glanced at Bradley with the sort of dismissive look usually reserved for gum on one's shoe. Mr. Thompson, we're conducting private business here. Perhaps you should return to your station. But she's my sister-in-law, Bradley insisted, as if this relationship granted him special access. How fortunate for you, Mr. Atkinson replied coldly. Now, if you'll excuse us. Bradley stood frozen, watching as I was escorted to a luxurious private office with a view of the Manhattan skyline. Through the glass walls, I could see his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the dawning horror of realization. Inside the office, Mr. Atkinson apologized profusely. Ms. Wilson, if Mr. Thompson behaved inappropriately, I assure you the bank will address the matter immediately. Let's focus on my transaction for now, I replied, settling into a buttery leather chair. I'd like to make a withdrawal today. Of course. Your usual banker, Miss Chen, is currently with another client, but I'd be happy to assist personally. What amount were you considering? I paused, considering. The $100 I'd originally come for seemed laughably small now. But something more substantial might make a point that neither Bradley nor this bank would soon forget. I'd like to withdraw $100 million, please. For investment purposes. If Mr. Atkinson was shocked by the amount, he hid it well. Certainly. That will require some additional paperwork and security arrangements. Would you prefer electronic transfer to your investment account, or are you establishing a new position? Let's prepare the paperwork for a cash withdrawal first. I can always decide on the final disposition afterward. His eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his professional veneer. A cash withdrawal of that size would be unusual. There are certain regulatory requirements and logistical considerations. I understand. Please begin the process anyway. He nodded and picked up his phone, speaking in hushed tones. Within minutes, the office began filling with bank executives, each introducing themselves with increasing levels of enthusiasm. I recognized some from the bank's annual reports and financial news. Through the glass, I could see Bradley standing near the entrance to the private banking section, his face ashen. A supervisor appeared to be speaking sternly to him. Several colleagues were watching the unfolding drama with undisguised interest. As paperwork materialized and was placed before me for signatures, Bradley finally gathered the courage to knock on the glass door. Mr. Atkinson looked to me questioningly. "It's fine," I said. "Let him in." Bradley entered like a man approaching the gallows, his earlier arrogance replaced by naked panic. "Mac, can we talk for a moment?" "Privately." "I'm in the middle of a transaction, Bradley. Was there something you needed?" "I don't understand what's happening," he said, voice low and urgent. "Is this some kind of joke?" Mr. Atkinson cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, Ms. Wilson is one of our most valued private clients. I suggest you address her with appropriate respect." Bradley's eyes darted between us, then to the paperwork on the desk, paperwork with more zeros than he'd likely ever seen on a single transaction. "There must be some mistake," he insisted, though his voice had lost its conviction. "Mac lives in a tiny apartment. She drives a Honda from 2008. Her business is just her and a few programmers working out of a converted warehouse. My lifestyle choices are just that, choices," I replied calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a withdrawal to complete." But what about Sarah? Does she know about this?" "My financial situation is not something I discuss casually at family gatherings, especially when those gatherings have become opportunities for ridicule." His face flushed. "I never. You called me a beggar less than 20 minutes ago, Bradley. In front of your colleagues and customers." The executives in the room shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Atkinson's expression hardened further. "That was just a joke," Bradley stammered. "You know how I kid around." It didn't feel like a joke to me. I turned back to the paperwork, signing my name with deliberate strokes. It felt like years of condescension and judgment finally spoken aloud. "Mr. Thompson," Mr. Atkinson said firmly, "I believe you should step outside while we complete Ms. Wilson's transaction." Bradley ignored him, his desperation mounting. "Mac, please, let's talk about this. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Really. We're family." "Family," I repeated softly. "Is that what we are?" Because it hasn't felt that way in a very long time. I signed the final form and handed it to Mr. Atkinson, who nodded solemnly. "Everything appears to be in order, Ms. Wilson. We'll begin processing immediately. Given the size of the withdrawal, we'll need to coordinate with several institutions. Would tomorrow morning be acceptable for completion?" "That would be fine." "Excellent. We'll arrange secure transport and necessary security measures." "Is there anything else we can assist with today?" I glanced at Bradley, who looked like he might be sick. "No, thank you. That will be all." As the executives filed out, leaving just the three of us, Bradley made one last desperate attempt. "Mac, my job is not my concern," I finished for him. "Just as my dignity wasn't yours earlier today." I stood to leave, nodding respectfully to Mr. Atkinson. "Thank you for your assistance. I'll return tomorrow as arranged." Bradley followed me out, past the velvet rope, through the main banking floor where curious eyes tracked our progress. The whispers had already started. The bank that had witnessed my humiliation was now witnessing Bradley's. Just before the main doors, I paused and turned to him. "Oh, and Bradley? I won't be needing that $100 after all." The following morning, I returned to Prestige National Bank dressed exactly as I had been the day before, worn jeans, comfortable sweater, scuffed boots. The only difference was that this time, I was expected. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. The security guard who had eyed me suspiciously now rushed to open the door. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Atkinson is waiting for you." Inside, the bank had an entirely different energy. Staff members smiled deferentially as I passed. Customers who had witnessed yesterday's scene whispered behind manicured hands. And there, standing near the teller stations with the rigid posture of someone facing a firing squad, was Bradley. He looked like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, cardinal sins in his meticulous presentation. When our eyes met, he attempted a smile that came across as more of a grimace. Mr. Atkinson approached, flanked by several executives. MS. Wilson, wonderful to see you again. Everything has been prepared according to your specifications. Would you care for coffee before we proceed? No, thank you. I'd prefer to complete the transaction without delay. Of course. Right this way. As we moved toward the private banking section, I noticed something unusual. The main banking floor was significantly more crowded than it should have been on a Friday morning. Staff members who had no obvious business on the floor were finding reasons to linger. Word had spread about yesterday's incident and the unprecedented withdrawal about to take place. The private banking suite had been transformed. Additional security personnel stood at discrete intervals. A team from what appeared to be an armored car service waited in an adjacent room. The paperwork I had signed yesterday was displayed on a polished conference table, along with additional documents requiring final authorization. As discussed, we've arranged for the withdrawal of $100 million, Mr. Atkinson explained. Given the magnitude, we've coordinated with the Federal Reserve and several partner institutions. The physical currency will be transported under armed guard to whatever secure location you designate. I nodded, taking the seat at the head of the table. Through the glass walls, I could see that Bradley had followed us as far as the private banking entrance, where he now stood watching, his expression a complex mixture of shock, fear, and dawning comprehension. Before we proceed, I said, I'd like to understand the authentication protocols for a transaction of this size. Mr. Atkinson launched into a detailed explanation of the multi-level verification process, retinal scans, digital signatures, and federal oversight required. As he spoke, more bank executives filtered into the room, introducing themselves with increasing deference. MS. Wilson, I'm Harold Prescott, Chairman of the Board. Judith Blackwell, Chief Financial Officer. A pleasure to meet you in person. Richard Montgomery, Head of Global Investments. We're honored to serve you today. The parade of high-level executives continued, each treating me with a reverence that would have been comical if it weren't so telling about the power of perceived wealth. These were people who wouldn't have glanced at me twice yesterday. Today, they hung on my every word. As the final authentication measures were completed, Mr. Atkinson asked, "And how would you like the denominations arranged, Ms. Wilson?" Before I could answer, a commotion erupted outside the glass doors. Bradley was arguing with the security guard, gesturing frantically toward me. After a moment, the guard approached Mr. Atkinson, whispered something, and received a reluctant nod. Bradley burst into the room, his composure completely abandoned. "Mac, please, we need to talk. This is insane." The executives stared in shocked silence at this breach of protocol. Mr. Atkinson's face hardened. "Mr. Thompson, this is completely inappropriate. Security will escort you out immediately." "Wait," I said, raising a hand. "Let him speak." Bradley approached the table, aware of the numerous eyes judging his every movement. "Mac, I don't understand what's happening. Yesterday you were, and now you're." He gestured helplessly at the surroundings. "How is this possible?" "I sold my company 2 months ago. Modest Merchant was acquired for $800 million. His jaw literally dropped. The little software thing he had mocked for years had made me wealthier than he could ever hope to be with his banking career. 800 million, he repeated, the words seemingly impossible to process. Yes. After taxes and ensuring my employees were taken care of, I cleared just over 500 million. Bradley collapsed into a chair, uninvited. "Why didn't you tell us? Why are you still living in that apartment? Driving that car?" "Because those things don't matter to me, Bradley." "They never did." I turned back to Mr. Atkinson. "I apologize for the interruption. Shall we continue?" Mr. Atkinson nodded, shooting Bradley a look of profound disapproval. "As I was saying, we can arrange the currency in whatever denominations you prefer. Standard mixed denominations will be fine." "Very good. And the security transport?" We've prepared several options for your consideration. As he outlined elaborate security measures involving armored vehicles and private security teams, Bradley sat in stunned silence, watching the process unfold. Occasionally, he would shake his head slightly, as if trying to reconcile the Mackenzie Wilson he thought he knew with the woman commanding this level of institutional respect. One of the executives leaned forward. "Ms. Wilson, forgive me for asking, but a cash withdrawal of this magnitude is unusual. Might I inquire about its purpose?" Before I could answer, Bradley interjected desperately, "She's not really taking the money. This is just some kind of lesson, right, Mac? To show me up after yesterday." All eyes turned to me. The room had gone completely silent. Even the security personnel were watching with undisguised interest. "The purpose," I said carefully, "is to remind certain individuals and institutions that appearances can be deceiving and that treating people with dignity should not be contingent on their perceived net worth." Mr. Atkinson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Ms. Wilson, I want to assure you that Prestige National Bank values all its clients, regardless of their account balances." "Does it?" I asked mildly. "Because yesterday, I was humiliated on your main banking floor while attempting to withdraw $100. Not a single staff member intervened until I specifically requested to speak with management." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. The chairman, Mr. Prescott, leaned forward. "Ms. Wilson, if there was any mistreatment, I assure you we take such matters extremely seriously. Rest assured, appropriate action will be taken." All eyes briefly flicked to Bradley, whose career prospects were visibly dimming by the second. "I would hope so," I replied. "Now, about the transfer." "Mac," Bradley interrupted again, his voice breaking slightly. "Please. Think about Sarah. About family." "I have thought about family, Bradley, for years. While you were mocking my career, my car, my clothes, all choices I made consciously. By the way, I was building something meaningful. Something that helps thousands of small business owners like my parents." His face flushed with shame. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, Bradley Thompson appeared genuinely speechless. I turned back to the assembled banking officials. "Gentlemen, ladies, I appreciate the arrangements you've made. However, I believe I've made my point. I won't be completing the cash withdrawal today." A collective sigh of relief swept the room. Moving $100 million in physical currency would have been a logistical nightmare, even with their elaborate preparations. Instead, I continued, "I'd like to transfer $50 million to establish a new foundation supporting small businesses affected by medical hardships, something my parents would have appreciated. The remaining $50 million can stay in my accounts here, provided certain changes are made to ensure all clients are treated with respect, regardless of their appearance or the size of their transaction." Mr. Prescott nodded eagerly. "We would be honored to partner with your foundation, Ms. Wilson. And I personally guarantee a full review of our client service protocols." As the executives rushed to accommodate my revised instructions, Bradley sat motionless, the full impact of his misjudgment settling over him like a shroud. His carefully constructed world of status and appearance had been shattered in less than 24 hours. I stood to leave, the necessary transfer instructions completed. "Mr. Atkinson, thank you for your assistance. I believe we're finished here." "Of course, Ms. Wilson. It's been our pleasure. Will you be requiring a car service?" I smiled. "No, thank you. My Honda is parked outside. It may not be impressive, but it's reliable and paid for values my parents taught me to appreciate." As I walked toward the exit, banking officials lined up to shake my hand and offer business cards. Bradley followed a few steps behind, a man watching his professional reputation disintegrate in real time. Outside, in the bright morning sunlight, he finally found his voice again. "What are you going to tell Sarah?" I paused beside my faithful old car. "I haven't decided yet, but I think it's time for some honest conversation in this family, don't you? His shoulders slumped in defeat. She's going to kill me when she finds out how I treated you. That's between you and her. I unlocked my car door. I suggest you start practicing sincere apologies. You're going to need them, both at home and at work. As I drove away, I caught a last glimpse of Bradley in my rearview mirror, standing alone on the sidewalk outside the bank where, until yesterday, he had felt so powerful. The bank where everything had changed, not because I had finally become wealthy, but because I had finally stood up for myself. The drive to Sarah and Bradley's Westchester mansion took nearly an hour, giving me plenty of time to reflect. My Honda, maligned so often by Bradley, hummed steadily along the highway. I'd purchased it used after college and maintained it meticulously, another lesson from my father, who believed in caring for what you have rather than constantly chasing something newer and shinier. I hadn't planned to visit Sarah before the scheduled dinner party tomorrow, but after the bank incident, waiting seemed impossible. Our relationship needed addressing as urgently as Bradley's behavior had. The security guard at their gated community recognized my car and gave me a perfunctory wave. I'd visited often enough to be known, though never quite welcomed. The manicured lawns and imposing homes represented everything Sarah had aspired to since childhood. She'd achieved the lifestyle she wanted, but at what cost to her authentic self? Sarah's massive Tudor-style home appeared ahead, all stone facade and perfect landscaping. I parked in the circular driveway beside her Mercedes SUV, feeling the familiar sense of inadequacy their wealth usually triggered in me. Today, though, the feeling was tempered by a new perspective. My choices had been deliberate, hers had too. I rang the doorbell, hearing the melodious chime echo through their cavernous foyer. After a moment, Sarah answered, her expression shifting from surprise to immediate criticism. "Mac? What are you doing here? The dinner party isn't until tomorrow." Her eyes scanned my appearance with practiced disappointment. "And you're still wearing those awful jeans." I specifically said no denim. "Hello to you too, Sarah." I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." She sighed dramatically, closing the door behind me. "If this is about Bradley's text, I already told him I'd take you shopping before dinner. Though I don't see why you can't handle basic social attire at your age. Bradley texted you? Just something about making sure you felt welcome tomorrow. Honestly, he's being weird today. Called me 3 times from work, but never got to the point." She led me through their showroom of a house toward the kitchen. "Want coffee?" Greta just made a fresh pot before she left. Greta was their weekday housekeeper, another detail from their life that had always been subtly wielded to highlight the difference in our circumstances. Coffee would be great. The kitchen was a designer's dream, all marble and gleaming appliances that looked barely used. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee into delicate cups that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "So what's this about?" "I'm meeting the interior designer in an hour to discuss redoing the guest rooms." I took the offered cup. "It's about Bradley. Something happened at the bank today." Sarah's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "What, did he finally get that promotion?" "He's been insufferable about it for weeks." "No, not a promotion. Quite the opposite, actually." Her expression sharpened. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, the front door opened and closed with a heavy thud. Bradley's voice called out, strained and urgent, "Sarah, are you home?" Sarah frowned at her watch. "Why is he back so early?" Bradley appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his bank attire, but looking disheveled and frantic. He froze when he saw me. "You're here," he said flatly. "I am." Sarah looked between us, sensing the tension. "What is going on?" "Bradley, why aren't you at work?" He loosened his tie further, a gesture so uncharacteristic it made Sarah's eyes widen. "I took the rest of the day off. We need to talk." That's what Max said. "Will someone please tell me what's happening?" Bradley moved to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch, despite it being barely noon. "You tell her," he said to me, downing half the glass in one swallow. I set my coffee cup down carefully. Sarah, there's something I haven't told you. About my company, Modest Merchant. Your little software thing? She echoed Bradley's dismissive phrasing perfectly, confirming they'd discussed me in exactly the terms I'd suspected. Yes, 2 months ago it was acquired by tech giant Industries for $800 million. Sarah's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. That's not funny, Mac. It's not a joke. I'm now worth over $500 million after taxes and employee compensation. Sarah stared at me, then at Bradley, who nodded grimly and finished his scotch. That's impossible, she stammered. You live in that tiny apartment. You wear the same clothes for years. Your car is ancient. By choice, I emphasized, not necessity. Sarah collapsed onto a kitchen stool, her perfectly manicured hand pressed against her throat. I don't understand. Your husband does, I said, glancing at Bradley. Would you like to explain what happened at the bank, or should I? Bradley poured another scotch, his hand visibly shaking. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Over the next 20 minutes, Bradley recounted the bank incident, each humiliating detail forcing its way through his obvious reluctance. Sarah's expression cycled through disbelief, horror, and finally, a cold anger I'd never seen directed at her husband before. You called my sister a beggar? Her voice was deadly quiet. In public? At your workplace? Bradley stared into his empty glass. I didn't know. That she was rich? Sarah cut in sharply. So, it would have been fine if she weren't? Is that what you're saying? His silence was answer enough. Sarah turned to me, her perfect composure cracking slightly. And you went back today to what? Destroy his career. I went back to make a point, I corrected. About dignity and respect. About judging people by appearances. By withdrawing $100 million in cash? That's insane, Mac. I didn't actually withdraw it, but the bank needed to believe I would. Bradley laughed humorlessly. Oh, they believed it. The chairman of the board personally apologized to her. The head of global investments offered to manage her portfolio for free. Meanwhile, I've been suspended pending an ethics review. Sarah's face paled. Suspended? Bradley, your bonus is the least of my concerns right now, he finished, pouring a third scotch. I'll be lucky if I'm not fired outright. The three of us sat in uncomfortable silence. The massive kitchen, with its status-signaling appliances and imported fixtures, suddenly seemed hollow and performative, much like the relationship we'd been maintaining for years. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah finally asked, her voice smaller than I'd heard it since we were children. About the money, about the company, any of it. I studied my sister's face, still beautiful, still familiar beneath the expensive highlights and cosmetic procedures. Would it have mattered? Would it have changed how you see me? Of course it would have, she exclaimed, then caught herself as she registered the implication of her words. Exactly, I said quietly. And that's the problem, isn't it? My worth to you, to both of you, has always been tied to external markers. What I earn, what I wear, where I live. That's not fair, Sarah protested, but her conviction was wavering. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my work without dismissing it as that little software thing? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without criticizing my appearance or suggesting I was somehow embarrassing you? Bradley refilled his glass silently, avoiding both our gazes. I didn't tell you about the acquisition because I wanted to see if anything would change between us naturally, I continued. If we could find our way back to being sisters without money as a factor. Sarah's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. We are sisters. Are we? Because most days, it feels like I'm just an obligation you tolerate, a reminder of a past you'd rather forget. The doorbell rang, interrupting our confrontation. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, visibly relieved at the distraction. That must be Vivian, the interior designer. She stood, smoothing her cashmere sweater. I should. Go ahead, I said. We can finish this later. As Sarah left to answer the door, Bradley looked at me directly for the first time since arriving home. What happens now? With the bank, with everything. That depends partly on you, I replied. On whether yesterday was an aberration or a true reflection of how you view people with less financial means than yourself. He had the decency to look ashamed. I've never spoken to anyone else that way. But you've thought it, I challenged. About waiters, cashiers, the gardeners who maintain your perfect lawn. His silence confirmed my suspicion. Sarah returned with a stylish woman carrying fabric swatches and design portfolios. She hesitated in the doorway, clearly sensing the tension. Vivian, I'm so sorry, but we're dealing with a family situation. Could we reschedule for Monday? The designer agreed readily, making a swift exit. As the front door closed, Sarah turned back to us, her social mask discarded. Your dinner party tomorrow, I said. Will you still have it with Bradley's situation at the bank? Sarah's eyes darted to her husband, then back to me. I don't know. The Prescotts will be there, and the Montgomerys. Harold Prescott? I asked. Richard Montgomery. Bradley groaned softly. The chairman and the head of investments. Both of whom now apparently worship the ground Mac walks on. Sarah's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. They're coming to my dinner party, and they now know that we've been treating you like a poor relation you tolerate out of obligation? I finished for her. Yes, I imagine that will make for some interesting dinner conversation. The house phone rang, adding to the chaotic atmosphere. Sarah answered it, her expression growing, increasingly distressed as she listened. That was Elaine Prescott, she said after hanging up. She's terribly sorry, but they won't be able to make it tomorrow. Something about an unexpected commitment with her dear friend Mackenzie Wilson that simply can't be rescheduled. I stifled a surprised laugh. I had no plans with Elaine Prescott, who until today had no idea I existed. The bank executives were clearly choosing sides, and not in Bradley's favor. I never asked them to cancel, I assured Sarah. It doesn't matter, she replied, sinking back onto a kitchen stool. The Montgomerys will call next, then the Sullivans. By evening, we'll be hosting a dinner party for exactly nobody. Bradley reached for the scotch bottle again, but Sarah intercepted his hand. I think you've had enough. We need to figure this out. For the first time since childhood, I saw my sister taking control rather than performing the role she thought others expected of her. It was a glimpse of the Sarah I remembered, practical, decisive, real. Figure what out? Bradley asked miserably. My career is over. Our social standing is ruined. All because I mocked the wrong person in the wrong place. No, Sarah corrected firmly. All because you were cruel to my sister. The consequences would be deserved whether she had money or not. Bradley and I both stared at her, equally surprised by this unexpected defense. Sarah turned to me, her expression softening. The dinner party is canceled. Instead, I think the three of us need to have a real conversation about family, about the past, and about where we go from here. As Bradley slumped further into his chair and Sarah began clearing away coffee cups with her own hands rather than waiting for the housekeeper, I realized that wealth hadn't changed my life nearly as much as the truth finally being exposed. For better or worse, nothing between us would ever be the same again. 3 months after the bank incident, I parked my new electric car, a concession to practicality rather than status, outside the rehabilitation center where Bradley had been staying. The modern facility, nestled in the Connecticut countryside, specialized in treating executives for burnout, depression, and substance abuse, all issues that had surfaced in Bradley after his suspension from the bank. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, nervously checking her makeup in the visor mirror. Do I look okay? I want him to see I'm doing well, but not like I'm trying too hard. You look fine, I assured her. And he'll be happy to see you regardless. Today marked Bradley's completion of the 90-day program, a condition the bank had set for possibly reinstating him, albeit in a significantly reduced role. The ethics investigation had concluded with a formal reprimand, mandatory sensitivity training, and a demotion from management to regular banking services. His salary had been cut by 40%. Sarah had surprised everyone, perhaps even herself, by supporting the bank's decision. He needs to understand that actions have consequences, she'd said firmly when Bradley initially resisted the program. This isn't just about your career. It's about who you're becoming as a person. We entered the facility together, signing in at the reception desk where the staff greeted Sarah by name. She'd visited 3 times a week without fail, while I had come for the required family therapy sessions twice monthly. Bradley met us in the garden courtyard, looking healthier than he had in years. The perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased, and though his designer clothes had been replaced by simple khakis and a button-down shirt, he carried himself with a different kind of confidence. "You came," he said, embracing Sarah first, then extending a hand to me. We'd made progress, but weren't quite at hugging level yet. "Of course we came," Sarah replied. "It's a big day." We settled at a wrought iron table beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Bradley looked at me directly, something he'd struggled with during our initial family therapy sessions. "I want to thank you, Mac." "For what?" "For not pressing charges against the bank. For giving me a chance to keep my job, even at a lower level. For coming to the therapy sessions." He paused. "For forgiving me when I didn't deserve it." I nodded, acknowledging his gratitude without diminishing the seriousness of what had happened. "Your recovery has to be for you, Bradley. Not for your job or your social standing. I know that now." He gestured around the peaceful grounds. 90 days gives you a lot of time to think about what actually matters." Sarah reached across the table to take his hand. They'd been working on their marriage alongside Bradley's personal issues. The journey hadn't been smooth. Sarah had moved into the guest house for a month when Bradley initially blamed her for encouraging his materialism, but they'd emerged stronger for confronting their shared values honestly. "So what happens now?" I asked. Bradley straightened in his chair. "I start back at the bank next Monday. Regular hours, regular customers. No management responsibilities." "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, relieved." He smiled wryly. "Turns out managing people isn't my strength. I'm looking forward to just doing the work without the politics." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And we've downsized. The house is on the market." This was news to me. "You're selling the Westchester mansion?" She nodded. "We're moving to a townhouse in the city. Smaller, but more practical with Bradley working downtown. And we don't need 6 bedrooms and a home theater for just the 2 of us." The shift in their priorities seemed genuine rather than forced. Over these months, I'd watched my sister rediscover parts of herself that had been buried beneath her pursuit of status. She'd even started volunteering at a community center teaching financial literacy, using skills from her business degree in a way that actually helped people. "I have news too," I said. "The foundation is officially launching next week. We've already approved grants for 50 small businesses affected by medical hardships." I'd named it the Wilson Family Foundation in honor of our parents. The mission was supporting entrepreneurs who were caring for ill family members while trying to keep their businesses afloat, exactly the situation our parents had faced, and that I'd faced after them. "That's wonderful, Mac," Sarah said, her enthusiasm genuine. "Mom and Dad would be so proud." "I hope so." I hesitated before continuing. "Actually, that's partly why I wanted to meet today, beyond celebrating Bradley's completion. I'd like you both to consider being involved with the foundation." They exchanged surprised glances. "In what capacity?" Bradley asked cautiously. "Sarah, with your business degree and event planning experience, you'd be perfect for coordinating our fundraising galas and community outreach. And Bradley, your banking background, especially now that you're working with regular customers rather than just the wealthy ones, gives you insight into the financial challenges small businesses face." "You'd trust us with this?" Sarah asked quietly. "After everything?" "I'm not saying it would be immediate. You could start as volunteers, see if it's something you connect with. But yes, I would trust you. The people you're becoming, not the people you were." Bradley looked down at his hands. "I don't deserve a second chance." None of us deserve second chances, I replied. That's what makes them valuable. They're gifts, not entitlements. The conversation shifted to practical matters. When they would move, how Bradley's first week back might go, the details of the foundation launch. As we talked, I noticed a new equality in our dynamic. My financial status hadn't created a reverse imbalance where I now held power over them. Instead, our shared vulnerability had leveled the playing field in a way money never could. After lunch, we walked the grounds together before saying our goodbyes. Bradley would return home tomorrow after a final meeting with his therapist. As we reached my car, Sarah hung back slightly. Can I ask you something, Mac? Of course. Are you happy? With all the money, the foundation, everything that's happened. I considered the question carefully. I'm purposeful. The money itself doesn't make me happy or unhappy, it's just a tool. But using it to honor Mom and Dad's memory, to help people in situations like ours, that brings meaning. She nodded thoughtfully. I've been chasing the wrong things for so long. Status, appearances, other people's approval. We all do sometimes. Not you, she said with unexpected admiration. You always knew who you were. I laughed softly. I definitely didn't. I just knew who I didn't want to become. Bradley approached, having given us a moment of sister time. The car service is here for me. Last night in rehab. Sarah hugged him, whispering something in his ear that made him stand straighter, more resolved. When they separated, he turned to me. I owe you an apology that I can never fully express. Not just for the bank, but for years of judgment and condescension. He extended his hand again. I hope someday to be worthy of calling you family. I took his hand, then surprised both of us by pulling him into a brief hug. Family isn't about worthiness, Bradley. It's about growth and forgiveness. Both directions. As they walked toward his waiting car, I found myself thinking about our parents. How they'd valued honesty and hard work above status, how they'd taught us that character outweighs appearance every time. Sarah had temporarily lost sight of those lessons in her pursuit of what she thought was success. I had sometimes clung to them too rigidly, using my principled modesty as a shield against intimacy and vulnerability. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the middle, in the balance between remembering your roots and embracing growth, between maintaining values and allowing change. 2 weeks later, I stood at my parents' graves, fresh flowers in hand. Sarah stood beside me, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater not unlike what I typically wore. We hadn't coordinated outfits. She'd simply rediscovered her own comfortable style rather than what she thought was expected of her. Do you think they can see us? She asked softly as we placed the flowers. Do you think they know about everything that's happened? I like to think they do, I replied. Not the money part, that wouldn't matter to them. But the foundation, the people we're helping, the way we found our way back to being sisters, that would matter. Sarah linked her arm through mine, a gesture from our childhood that felt both foreign and familiar. I'm sorry it took a bank meltdown and Bradley's public humiliation for me to remember who I really am. Sometimes we need dramatic wake-up calls. I smiled at her. Though maybe next time, we can skip the $100 million withdrawal threat. She laughed, the sound echoing across the peaceful cemetery. Deal. As we walked back to our cars, her new modest sedan parked beside my electric vehicle, I realized that wealth had changed me after all, just not in the ways people might expect. It hadn't altered my values or lifestyle significantly, but it had given me the confidence to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and ultimately, to offer forgiveness from a place of strength rather than obligation. Money, I'd learned, didn't determine character, it simply revealed it. In Bradley's case, wealth and status had exposed his insecurities and prejudices. In Sarah's case, the pursuit of wealth had temporarily buried her authentic self. And in my case, having wealth while choosing simplicity had finally allowed me to stop proving myself and start living authentically. The greatest inheritance from our parents wasn't financial, It was the understanding that dignity isn't determined by dollars, that respect should never be contingent on net worth, and that family, when it works as it should, is about acceptance rather than achievement. I've often wondered what would have happened if I'd revealed my wealth from the beginning. Would Bradley have treated me differently? Would Sarah and I have maintained a closer relationship? Perhaps. But then I would never have known who they or I truly were beneath the surface of status and appearance. So, what about you? Have you ever been judged by your appearance or financial status? Or found yourself judging others based on these superficial factors? What would you do if you suddenly came into wealth? Would you change your lifestyle completely or stay true to who you've always been? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Remember, true wealth isn't measured by your bank account, but by how you treat others, especially when no one's watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.
I'm Abigail Turner, 32 years old, and I'm standing outside the gleaming Westbrook Plaza Hotel, clutching an invitation to my sister Julia's corporate holiday party. My stomach knots as I check my simple navy dress. We've barely spoken in years, yet here I am. When I finally enter, Julia's eyes meet mine for a split second before darting away, barely acknowledging my presence. She's always been competitive, but tonight feels different. I watch as she anxiously glances at the empty seat marked for her CEO. Something tells me this reunion is about to become unforgettable. If you're enjoying this story already, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button as I reveal what happened next at this corporate disaster. The December air bit at my cheeks as I stood outside the hotel, memories flooding back. Julia and I weren't always strangers. We shared a bedroom for 16 years in our modest home in Milwaukee. But even then, there was always this undercurrent of competition that defined our relationship. I adjusted my simple gold necklace, a stark contrast to the statement jewelry I knew would be adorning necks inside. My company, Access Tech Solutions, had grown from a tiny startup I launched in my garage to a respected player in the adaptive technology industry. We created software and hardware solutions for people with disabilities, focusing on making technology accessible to everyone. But looking at me in my sensible shoes and modest car, most people would never guess. That was by design. I believed in the work, not the trappings of success. Julia, however, had always been the opposite. "Abby, you came?" My mother's voice rang in my ear through my phone. "Did you find the place okay?" "Yes, Mom. I'm just taking a minute before going in," I replied, watching expensively dressed people streaming through the hotel's revolving doors. "Your sister really wants you there, honey. This is a big night for her." I bit back a sigh. Mom always saw what she wanted to see in our relationship. The family dinner last month had been her idea, a not-so-subtle intervention to repair the sisterly bond that had frayed to nearly nothing. Julia had reluctantly mentioned this holiday party, and Mom had practically RSVP'd for me on the spot. "I know, Mom. I'm going in now. Remember, she's up for that big promotion. Having family support means a lot." Family support. As if Julia had been supportive when I mortgaged everything I owned to start Access Tech, or when I worked 18-hour days for 3 years straight to get it off the ground. But I pushed those thoughts away. Tonight wasn't about our past. It was about trying to find a way forward. I handed my coat to the attendant and stepped into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over circular tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played softly in one corner. Corporate logos for Pinnacle Innovations. Julia's employer adorned strategic locations throughout the space. I spotted Julia immediately. She always did know how to command attention in a room. Her emerald dress complemented her auburn hair, which was swept into an elegant updo. She stood among a circle of colleagues, champagne flute in hand, laughing at something someone had said. I took a deep breath and approached. Julia's smile faltered when she saw me, just for a millisecond, but I caught it. "You made it," she said, her tone revealing neither pleasure nor displeasure. "Everyone, this is my sister. Not my sister Abigail or my sister who runs her own company, just my sister, as if I were an extension of her lacking identity of my own. Nice to meet you all," I said, smiling warmly at the circle of curious faces. "I'm Abigail. Abby works with computers too," Julia added with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Different side of the industry than us." One man in an expensive suit extended his hand. "Thomas Wells, marketing director. What firm are you with?" Before I could answer, Julia cut in. "Oh, Abby's not with a firm. She does her own thing. Very small scale." She turned to me. "Drink? They have that sweet wine you like." I hadn't mentioned wine preferences to Julia in at least 5 years. "I'll get something from the bar, thanks," I said, needing a moment to regroup. As I walked away, I heard Julia smoothly transition the conversation to the new pinnacle project she was spearheading. Same old Julia, making sure the spotlight never strayed too far from her. The bartender handed me a sparkling water, and I took a moment to observe the room. Men and women in designer clothes chatted in groups, their laughter occasionally rising above the music. I recognized the easy confidence of people accustomed to moving in these circles. While I had achieved success in my own right, this world of corporate politics and posturing had never been my natural habitat. My phone buzzed with a text from my lead developer, Zoe. "New accessibility engine testing complete. Results amazing. Call when you can." Work news normally would have thrilled me, but tonight it just highlighted the vast differences between Julia's world and mine. Her gold-plated corporate ladder climbing versus my mission-driven enterprise. I tucked my phone away, determined to give this evening a fair chance. "You must be Julia's sister." A woman with a Pinnacle name badge appeared beside me. "I'm Meredith from HR. Abigail, nice to meet you." "Julia talks about you sometimes," Meredith said, though her tone suggested those talks weren't entirely complimentary. "All good things, I hope," I replied with a practiced smile. Meredith's polite laugh told me everything I needed to know. "It's unusual for employees to bring family to these events, usually just spouses. Julia and I are trying to spend more time together," I explained, not mentioning our mother's persistent orchestration. "That's sweet. Family is so important," Meredith said, though her eyes were already scanning the room for more advantageous conversation partners. "Excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with." And just like that, I was alone again, sipping sparkling water at my sister's corporate party, wondering how long I needed to stay before making a polite exit. I glanced at Julia, now holding court with a larger group, periodically checking the entrance as if waiting for someone important to arrive. The night was young, but I already felt the familiar weight of being Julia's less interesting, less important sister settling back onto my shoulders. I straightened my posture and reminded myself that I had nothing to prove to these people, even if Julia seemed determined to prove something to them about me. "So, what exactly do you do again?" asked a woman in a sleek black dress, swirling her martini as she gave my outfit a once-over. I'd been attempting to blend into the background near a large potted plant when Julia had steered this group of her colleagues in my direction. "I run a technology company focused on accessibility solutions," I answered, trying to keep it simple. Julia laughed a little too loudly. "Abby means she helps fix computer problems for people who aren't tech-savvy, like a help desk but freelance." She turned to me with a tight smile. "Isn't that right?" I felt my cheeks warm. "Actually, Access Tech develops adaptive software and hardware for people with disabilities. We just completed a major project that allows visually impaired users to navigate complex websites with voice commands." A man in the group raised his eyebrows with what seemed like genuine interest. "That sounds fascinating. Is there a growing market for that kind of specialized technology?" Julia stepped slightly in front of me, physically inserting herself between me and her colleague. Speaking of growing markets, Harold, did you see the projections for the Asian expansion? I worked on those numbers all weekend. The conversation was efficiently redirected, and I was once again relegated to the periphery. I caught snippets of corporate jargon as Julia dominated the discussion, occasionally throwing glances my way as if to make sure I was witnessing her importance. "Julia, your sister was about to tell us about her business," Harold said, attempting to circle back. "Oh, it's not really a business, Julia said with a dismissive laugh. "It's more of a passion project, isn't it, Abby? Like when we were kids and you'd take apart Dad's radio to see how it worked." "Actually, we employ 37 people now," I said quietly. Julia's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite identify. Annoyance? Surprise. She quickly recovered. 37. Wow, when did that happen? Last I heard it was just you and a couple of college interns. "We've grown quite a bit in the past few years," I replied, aware that everyone was watching our exchange with interest. "Well, good for you," Julia said in a tone that suggested she was humoring a child. "But Harold, you simply must hear about the presentation I gave to the executive committee last week. Frederick himself said it was refreshingly innovative." Frederick? That must be the CEO she kept anxiously looking for. I considered confronting her right then, calling out her dismissive behavior. But a memory flashed in my mind, our 8th grade science fair. I'd spent weeks building a working model of a solar-powered water filtration system. Julia had thrown together a volcano with baking soda and vinegar the night before. When the judges came around, she'd stepped in front of my display, claiming loudly that the really cool explosion was coming from her project. She got more attention, but I got the blue ribbon. Some patterns never changed. I excused myself to visit the restroom, needing a moment alone. As I walked away, I heard Julia loudly ask, "Did I mention I'm being considered for the director position, youngest in company history?" The bathroom was mercifully empty. I leaned against the marble countertop, studying my reflection in the mirror. My blonde hair was pulled back in a simple updo, my makeup minimal. Nothing like Julia's glamorous appearance. But then I'd never wanted to be Julia. I'd only wanted her respect, or at the very least her honesty. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Zoe. "Forbes wants to interview you about the patent approval. Call ASAP. The patent." We'd been waiting months for that approval. It was a significant milestone for Access Tech One that would likely lead to major new contracts. For a moment, I was tempted to return to the party and share the news, to see the look on Julia's face when she realized her help desk sister had just secured a game-changing patent. But what would that accomplish? Would it fix years of competitive undermining? Would it suddenly make Julia see me as an equal rather than an afterthought? No. This wasn't about proving myself to Julia or her colleagues. I'd already proven myself in ways that mattered to me. I tucked my phone away without responding and returned to the party, determined to get through the evening with Grace intact. As I re-entered the ballroom, I noticed Julia deep in conversation with a stern-looking woman who appeared to be a senior executive. Julia's body language was deferential, eager to please. The woman nodded curtly before walking away, and Julia's shoulders momentarily sagged with what looked like relief. "Everything okay?" I asked as I approached. Julia startled, then quickly composed herself. "Fine." That was Catherine, VP of Strategic Development. She says the CEO is definitely coming tonight. Her eyes darted to the entrance again. "He rarely attends these events. Everyone's on edge." "Including you?" I asked gently. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "I have nothing to be nervous about. My performance reviews have been stellar." A server passed with a tray of champagne, and Julia snatched a glass, downing half of it in one go. "You should probably find somewhere to sit. The speeches will be starting soon." I felt a pang of sympathy for my sister. Despite her behavior, I could see the pressure she was under. Julia, I could leave if my being here is making things more stressful for you. For a brief moment, something like vulnerability crossed her features, but it was quickly replaced by her professional mask. Don't be silly. Stay. Just try not to, talk too much about your little business. These people are focused on enterprise-level solutions. And just like that, any sympathy I felt evaporated. I nodded stiffly and moved toward an empty table near the back of the room, wondering if I could slip out after the speeches without anyone noticing. I found myself wedged between a man who introduced himself as procurement, you wouldn't understand it, and a woman who hadn't looked up from her phone since I sat down. The evening had progressed from uncomfortable to unbearable as Julia's behavior became increasingly obvious. "Oh, Abby still drives that old Honda," she announced loudly to a group as I passed by the bar. "She's very frugal. Aren't you, Abby?" My old Honda was a 3-year-old hybrid. Julia leased a new luxury car every 2 years. Later, when someone asked about my company, "It's the cutest little operation. She works out of that converted garage space, right, Abby? So startup chic." Our converted garage space was actually 15,000 square feet of office space in downtown Milwaukee, but Julia had never bothered to visit. Each comment built upon the last, creating a caricature of me as Julia's quaint, somewhat backward sister who was dabbling in business while Julia conquered the corporate world. I kept my responses brief and pleasant, not wanting to create a scene. But inside each dismissive remark stung. "What exactly do you do at that little computer repair shop?" Julia asked loudly as I was speaking with an IT director who had shown genuine interest in accessible technology. "It's not a repair shop, Julia," I corrected quietly. As I was explaining, we develop adaptive technologies that make digital tools accessible to people with disabilities. We've recently expanded into artificial intelligence applications that can predict user needs based on previous interactions. The IT director leaned forward. "That's fascinating. Are you working with machine learning models for that prediction engine?" "Yes. We've developed a proprietary algorithm that can distinguish between intentional and accidental input, which is particularly useful for users with motor control challenges," I began. "Oh, Abby loves getting into the technical weeds," Julia interrupted with a laugh. "But Michael, you simply must tell her about Pinnacle's acquisition plans. Abby's always looking for inspiration for her little venture." Michael looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. "Well, I'm not sure how much I can share about that publicly." Of course, Julia said with a conspiratorial wink. "We're all family here. Speaking of which, Abby, what on earth possessed you to wear those shoes to a formal event?" I glanced down at my navy blue pumps, perfectly appropriate if not cutting-edge fashion. "These are fine, Julia, if you say so. I keep telling her she needs to upgrade her wardrobe if she wants to be taken seriously in business meetings, but she insists comfort is more important than appearance." Julia was speaking to Michael, but looking at me with a tight smile. Before I could respond, someone bumped into me from behind, splashing red wine down the side of my dress. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." It was Julia's assistant, Diane, looking mortified, but not entirely convincing. "It's fine," I said, grabbing a napkin from the table. "Just an accident." "Diane, would you show my sister to the restroom and maybe find her a place to wait while that dries? Somewhere out of the way. The CEO will be arriving soon, and we want to make a good impression." Julia's tone made it clear that my wine-stained dress did not constitute a good impression. "Of course, Ms. Taylor." Diane gestured for me to follow her. "It's really fine," I protested. "I can manage." "I insist," Julia said firmly. "We can't have you walking around like that when Frederick arrives." As Diane led me away, I heard Julia loudly explaining to those nearby, "My sister, so clumsy since we were kids. Remember when she knocked over the entire display at my college graduation ceremony? Some things never change." I had never attended Julia's college graduation. Our father had been ill, and I had stayed home to care for him while Mom and Julia went to the ceremony. It was a completely fabricated story designed to diminish me further in front of her colleagues. In the bathroom, I did my best to blot the wine from my dress. The stain wasn't as bad as it initially seemed, but it was still visible. Ms. Taylor suggested you might want to wait in the lobby until the speeches are over. Diane said, not quite meeting my eyes. The CEO is very particular about these events. I'm sure he is, I replied, but I'll be rejoining the party. My sister was kind enough to invite me after all. Diane looked uncomfortable. She was very specific about you waiting elsewhere. Was she? I met Diane's eyes in the mirror. And do you always do exactly what Julia tells you to? A flash of something that might have been respect crossed Diane's face. Not always, she admitted, but often enough to keep my job. I softened. I understand. But I'm not going to hide in the lobby because of a small wine stain. I'll take responsibility if your CEO is offended by my appearance. Diane nodded and left me alone in the bathroom. I took a deep breath, remembering a similar incident from our childhood. I was 12, Julia 14. I had been selected for a regional science competition, and Julia had accidentally spilled orange juice all over my presentation board the morning of the event. I had stayed up all night remaking it while she slept soundly. The next day I took second place. Julia had never forgiven me for not failing. I straightened my shoulders and returned to the ballroom, determined not to let history repeat itself. I wouldn't be hidden away or diminished wine stain or no wine stain. As I re-entered the room, I heard Julia's voice amplified by a microphone. She was standing at the front of the room, glass raised in what appeared to be a toast. Her eyes found mine as I slipped in at the back, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes spread across her face. And speaking of special guests, she continued, I'd like to acknowledge my sister who made a rare appearance outside her comfort zone tonight. All eyes turned to me, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. This wasn't going to be good. There she is, my +1 mistake! Julia's voice rang out through the speakers, followed by a ripple of laughter from the crowd. I froze near the back wall, acutely aware of every eye in the room on me. Come on up here, Abby. Don't be shy. I remained where I was, my feet seemingly glued to the floor. Julia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Always the wallflower, my little sister, she continued. Some of you have had the pleasure of meeting Abigail tonight. For those who haven't, she runs a charming little hobby business out of a garage. More laughter, though I noticed a few uncomfortable glances exchanged among the crowd. She's always been the family tinkerer. Remember that laptop you tried to build from spare parts, Abby? The one that caught fire during the family Christmas. Julia was on a roll now, encouraged by the audience reaction. Firefighters are not the traditional holiday guests, but Abby always did like to stand out. That incident had happened, but it was Julia who had spilled eggnog on the circuit board after I told her not to bring drinks near my workstation. I had been 17, building a custom computer to donate to a local community center. Of course we all have to start somewhere, Julia continued in a faux generous tone. I began in the Pinnacle mailroom, if you can believe it. Now look at me. She gestured to herself grandly. While some of us are content with small dreams and smaller achievements, others reach for the stars. The implication was clear. I was small, insignificant, underachieving. Julia was the success story. But we can't all be corporate climbers, can we? Some of us have to stay grounded, providing those little services that make other people's successes possible. So here's to my sister who's always been, well, exactly who she is. Julia raised her glass higher, and the crowd followed suit, many looking uncertain about what exactly they were toasting. I felt a burning humiliation spread from my chest to my face. Years of competitive jabs had culminated in this public takedown, all to make Julia look superior in front of her colleagues and bosses. I could have walked out. I could have grabbed the microphone and set the record straight. I could have listed Access Tech's achievements, the lives we'd changed, the millions in revenue we generated. But something held me back. Some part of me recognized that Julia's behavior came from a place of deep insecurity, and publicly shaming her would only deepen the rift between us. So I smiled, a tight, controlled smile that took every ounce of my self-restraint, but a smile nonetheless. And I gave a small acknowledging wave to the crowd. Julia's expression flickered with what might have been disappointment. Had she been hoping for a scene, for me to storm out or break down in tears? Either reaction would have reinforced her narrative of me as emotional and unprofessional. And now, Julia continued, recovering quickly, we await the arrival of our esteemed CEO, Frederick Spencer, who I'm told will be joining us momentarily. As the team lead on the Richardson account, I've had the privilege of working closely with Frederick on our latest acquisition strategy. She was back in her element now, name-dropping and self-promoting. I stood frozen in place, the sting of her public ridicule still fresh, wondering how many more minutes I needed to endure before I could make a dignified exit. Just then, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The main doors had opened and a group of people in expensive suits entered. The energy in the room shifted immediately, conversations hushing as attention turned to the newcomers. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced a woman who had taken the microphone from Julia, "please welcome our CEO, Frederick Spencer, and the executive leadership team." Applause filled the room as a tall man with silver hair at his temples strode in, flanked by several serious-looking executives. Julia's face lit up with a practiced smile as she stepped forward, clearly eager to be among the first to greet him. Frederick Spencer scanned the room with the calculated gaze of someone used to being the most important person present. And then, unexpectedly, his eyes landed on me standing quietly at the back of the room with my wine-stained dress. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Frederick Spencer stopped abruptly. The executives with him nearly collided with one another at his sudden halt. His expression transformed from polite corporate neutrality to genuine surprise, and then astonishingly to what appeared to be respect. "Abigail Turner," he called out, his voice carrying across the now silent room. I gave a small nod, aware that every person in the ballroom had turned to stare at me, including Julia, whose smile had frozen on her face. And then Frederick Spencer, CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, did something that no one in that room expected. He walked directly toward me, bypassing Julia and all the other Pinnacle employees who had been vying for his attention. When he reached me, he extended his hand, and with a slight bow of his head said, "Good evening, ma'am. This is an unexpected honor." The room fell into a shocked silence so complete you could have heard a champagne bubble pop. Frederick Spencer, the notoriously difficult-to-impress CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, was standing in front of me with genuine respect in his eyes, while Julia remained frozen at the microphone, her mouth slightly open. "Mr. Spencer," I replied, shaking his hand. "It's nice to meet you in person at last." "The pleasure is entirely mine," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "I've been following your work in adaptive technology for years. Your recent breakthrough with the neural interface for mobility-impaired users is nothing short of revolutionary." From the corner of my eye, I could see Julia's face cycling through expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then the dawning horror of realization. "Everyone," Frederick announced, turning to address the room while keeping a respectful distance from me. "For those who don't know, we are in the presence of one of the most innovative minds in accessible technology, Abigail Turner, founder and CEO of Access Tech Solutions." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I could see Julia's colleagues exchanging glances, some looking at their phones, presumably searching for information about me and my company. "In fact," Frederick continued, "Pinnacle has just finalized a partnership agreement with Access Tech that will integrate their accessibility software into all our future products. This collaboration represents a $20 million investment from Pinnacle, our largest ever in the accessibility space. $20 million. The deal we'd been negotiating for months had gone through. I had been planning to tell my team tomorrow, but apparently the news had reached Pinnacle's upper management first. Julia's champagne glass was still raised in her frozen hand, the remnants of her mocking toast now a tableau of irony. Her eyes met mine across the room, wide with shock. Ms. Turner's company has grown from a startup to an industry leader in just 6 years, Frederick was saying to the rapt audience. Their patented adaptive technologies are being integrated into products used by millions of people worldwide. We're not just talking about a successful small business. We're talking about a company that's changing how people with disabilities interact with technology. One by one, the executives who had entered with Frederick approached me, introducing themselves and expressing admiration for Access Tech's innovations. Catherine, the VP who had spoken with Julia earlier, was particularly enthusiastic. Your predictive text algorithm for users with cognitive challenges is brilliant, she said. My nephew has dyslexia and uses your software. It's changed his academic experience completely. Throughout these interactions, I maintained my composure, thanking everyone for their kind words, while trying not to draw attention to Julia's earlier mischaracterization of my work. But the damage had been done. Everyone in that room now understood that the hobby business Julia had mocked was actually a multi-million-dollar enterprise worthy of Pinnacle's significant investment. Thomas Wells, the marketing director I'd met earlier, approached with a chagrined expression. I apologize for not recognizing your name earlier, Ms. Turner. Your reputation precedes you in the industry. No apology necessary, I assured him. I don't tend to advertise my position. Unlike some, he murmured with a pointed glance toward Julia, who had finally lowered her champagne glass and was attempting to regain her composure. I watched as Julia made her way through the crowd, moving toward our little group with a determined smile fixed on her face. When she reached us, she slipped her arm through mine in a gesture of sudden sisterly affection. Frederick, I see you've met my brilliant sister, she said, her voice overly bright. I was just telling everyone about her amazing company. Frederick raised an eyebrow. Yes, I caught the end of your introduction. Quite the family talent you two share. Julia's grip on my arm tightened almost painfully. Abby and I have always been close. I've supported her work from the beginning. I could have contradicted her, could have mentioned her years of dismissing my company as a hobby, but what would be the point? Everyone in the room had witnessed her mockery, followed by the CEO's respect for my work. The contrast spoke volumes. Ms. Turner, Frederick continued, addressing me rather than Julia. We'd be honored if you would consider leading a panel at our technology conference next month. Your insights on accessible design would be invaluable to our development team. I'd be happy to, I replied. Wonderful, Frederick smiled. My assistant will contact you directly to arrange the details. Julia's boss, a serious woman I'd noticed watching our exchange with interest, approached our group. Julia, a word, she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. As Julia reluctantly detached herself from my arm and followed her boss to a quiet corner, I found myself engaged in meaningful conversations about accessibility in technology. For the first time that evening, I was being seen for who I actually was, not who Julia had portrayed me to be. Your vision for technology that adapts to the user, rather than forcing the user to adapt to technology, is exactly the direction Pinnacle needs to move in, said a software engineer named Michael. Would you be open to consulting with our development team on our new interface design? Of course, I replied. Access Tech is always looking for opportunities to expand our impact. As the evening progressed, I noticed a steady stream of people approaching me with business cards and questions about Access Tech. Meanwhile, Julia stood with her boss, nodding repeatedly, her expression tense. When her boss finally walked away, Julia remained where she was, seemingly unsure of her next move. I excused myself from my conversation and approached her. It seemed cruel to leave her stranded in her moment of professional embarrassment, regardless of her treatment of me. Julia, I said quietly, She turned to me, her eyes flashing with a mixture of emotions. "Congratulations," she said, her voice tight. "You've managed to completely humiliate me in front of my entire company. Are you happy now?" I blinked, taken aback by her accusation. "Humiliate you, Julia? I didn't do anything." "Exactly," she hissed, keeping her voice low but intense. "You sat there and let me make a fool of myself. You knew about the Pinnacle deal. You knew the CEO would recognize you. Why didn't you say something?" I stared at her, incredulous. "When was I supposed to tell you, Julia, between you introducing me as your unemployed sister or mocking my hobby business? You never once asked me a genuine question about my work or my life. You were too busy creating a narrative that made you look superior." Julia's face flushed. "That's not fair. I was just having a little fun with the toasts. It's what we do at these events. Publicly humiliating family members is a corporate tradition. I must have missed that chapter in business school." For a moment, Julia looked like she might argue further, but then her shoulders sagged slightly. "My boss just told me the Richardson account is being reassigned. Apparently, someone with more diplomacy and professional judgment would be better suited to lead a major client relationship." I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you—" She looked at me skeptically. "Yes, Julia, I am. Despite what you might think, I've never wanted to see you fail. I've only wanted you to see me clearly, to acknowledge my work with the same respect I've always given yours." Julia glanced around the room where several people were watching our interaction with undisguised interest. "I should go mingle. Damage control." She started to move away, then paused. "Your company really closed a $20 million deal with Pinnacle." I nodded. "And you never thought to mention that when I invited you to a Pinnacle event." "You didn't invite me, Julia. Mom did. And no, I didn't think to mention it because in the 6 years I've been building Access Tech, you've never once shown genuine interest in what I do." Julia had no response to that. With a tight nod, she walked away, immediately approaching a group of executives with her professional smile firmly in place. I decided it was time for me to leave. I'd experienced enough emotional whiplash for one evening. As I collected my coat from the attendant, Frederick Spencer approached again. "Leaving so soon, Ms. Turner? The night is young." "It's been quite an evening," I replied diplomatically. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Frederick nodded understandingly. "Of course. Before you go, I wanted to personally thank you for the work you're doing. My daughter uses a screen reader due to her visual impairment, and your software has made a tremendous difference in her ability to work independently." I hadn't known about his daughter. Suddenly, his interest in Access Tech took on a more personal dimension. "I'm very glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "That's exactly why we do what we do." "I look forward to our company's collaboration," he said, shaking my hand again. "And I hope to see more of you at future Pinnacle events, perhaps under more straightforward circumstances." His knowing look told me he had understood exactly what had transpired earlier with Julia's toast. I smiled appreciatively and made my exit, stepping into the cool night air with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. Relief vindication, sadness for my sister, hope for our new business partnership, and beneath it all, a lingering question about whether Julia and I would ever find our way to a genuine relationship. As my car pulled away from the hotel, my phone lit up with a text. It was from Julia. "We need to talk." I sighed deeply. Yes, we certainly did. 3 days passed before I heard from Julia again. The text message saying, "We need to talk," hung unanswered between us, a digital representation of our complicated relationship. I had decided to let her make the next move to reach out when she was ready. In the meantime, I returned to Milwaukee and immersed myself in work. The Pinnacle deal was now public knowledge, and our office was buzzing with excitement. $20 million meant we could accelerate several research projects and hire additional staff. It was a game changer for Access Tech, and I should have been completely focused on the opportunities ahead. Instead, I found myself distracted by thoughts of Julia replaying our childhood moments alongside the events of the holiday party. Had I missed opportunities to bridge the gap between us? Had I contributed to the competitive dynamic by withdrawing rather than confronting her behavior directly? Earth to Abigail. Zoe waved a hand in front of my face during our morning meeting. You were miles away. Everything okay? Just thinking about the implementation timeline for the Pinnacle integration. I lied, shuffling the papers in front of me. Zoe gave me a skeptical look but didn't press the issue. Well, as I was saying, the Forbes interview is scheduled for Thursday. They want to focus on the patent and the Pinnacle partnership. Thanks, Zoe. Let's prep for that tomorrow. After the meeting, I retreated to my office, a modest space with large windows overlooking downtown Milwaukee. Unlike the corner offices of corporate executives, my workspace prioritized function over status. Prototypes of our latest adaptive devices lined one wall, while user feedback formed a collage on another. This was where I felt most at home, surrounded by the tangible evidence of Access Tech's mission. My phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number with a New York area code. Abigail Turner, I answered. Ms. Turner, this is Catherine Simmons from Pinnacle Innovations. The voice belonged to the VP who had spoken with Julia at the party. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all, Ms. Simmons. What can I do for you? First, please call me Catherine. After all, we're partners now, she said with a warmth that surprised me. I wanted to personally follow up on our conversation at the holiday party. Your insights on accessible design have sparked quite a discussion among our development team. We chatted for several minutes about potential collaboration opportunities beyond the formal partnership agreement. As the conversation wound down, Catherine's tone shifted slightly. On a more personal note, I wanted to apologize for what happened at the party. Your sister's presentation of your work was, well, it wasn't accurate or professional. I felt a surge of protectiveness toward Julia despite everything. Family dynamics can be complicated, I said diplomatically. Indeed, Catherine agreed. Still, I want you to know that Julia's behavior doesn't reflect Pinnacle's values of respect and integrity. We've had a discussion with her about it. I winced imagining Julia's humiliation at being reprimanded because of me. I appreciate your concern, but I hope this won't negatively impact Julia's position at Pinnacle. She's very talented. She is, Catherine acknowledged. And no, her job isn't in jeopardy. But this incident has given us insight into areas where she needs professional development, particularly around team dynamics and collaborative leadership. After we said our goodbyes, I sat staring at my phone, wondering if I should reach out to Julia. Before I could decide, an email notification appeared on my screen. From Julia. The subject line read simply, I'm sorry. I clicked it open with trepidation. Abby, I don't know how to begin this email. I'm sorry seems inadequate for what happened at the holiday party, but it's the truth. I am sorry. My boss suggested I take some time to reflect on my professional conduct, which is corporate speak for, you really messed up. She's right. I did mess up. Not just professionally, but personally. As your sister. I told myself I was just having fun with the toast, but that's not true. I deliberately tried to diminish you and your achievements because I felt threatened. I've always felt threatened by you, Abby. You've always seemed to succeed so effortlessly at the things that matter while I've had to fight for every inch of recognition. That's not an excuse. It's just context for a pattern of behavior I'm only now recognizing. I'd like to meet and talk in person if you're willing. I'll be in Milwaukee next weekend for a client meeting. Perhaps we could have dinner. Julia. I read the email 3 times, searching for the typical Julia deflections or subtle jabs, but there weren't any. It seemed genuine if cautious. I replied with a simple acceptance of her dinner invitation, suggesting a quiet restaurant near my office. Then I turned my attention back to work, trying not to get my hopes up about a potential breakthrough in our relationship. The weekend arrived quickly. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, a habit from years of business meetings. To my surprise, Julia was already there, seated at a corner table away from the main dining area. She looked different somehow, less polished, more authentic. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She stood when she saw me, an uncertain smile on her face. "Abby," she said awkwardly, extending her hand before switching to a brief hug. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, taking my seat across from her. "How was your client meeting?" "Productive," she said. "But that's not why I'm here. I owe you a real apology, Abby. Face to face." I nodded, giving her space to continue. "What I did at the holiday party was inexcusable," she began. "I deliberately misrepresented you and your work to make myself look better. It was petty, unprofessional, and cruel." "Yes, it was," I agreed quietly. Julia looked slightly taken aback by my direct agreement, but continued. "After you left, Frederick Spencer asked me how long I'd known about the Pinnacle partnership with Access Tech. When I admitted I hadn't known about it at all, he seemed genuinely confused. He assumed, since you're my sister, that I must have been instrumental in facilitating the connection." She took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. "Do you know how that felt? To have the CEO of my company assume I would be aware of and involved in a $20 million deal with my own sister's company, and to have to admit that I knew so little about your work that I'd been publicly mocking it minutes earlier. I can imagine it was difficult," I said, feeling a mix of sympathy and vindication. "Difficult doesn't begin to cover it," Julia said with a hollow laugh. "But it also made me realize something important. The problem isn't that you're somehow trying to outshine me. The problem is that I've been so focused on competition that I've completely missed who you actually are and what you've accomplished." Her words hung between us, a rare moment of self-awareness from my usually defensive sister. "Would you like to see what I actually do?" I asked impulsively. Julia looked up surprised. "What do you mean?" "Access Tech. Our office. Our work. Would you like to see it?" "Now? Why not? It's Saturday, so it'll be quiet. Just us." Julia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that very much." We paid for our barely touched drinks and walked the 3 blocks to the Access Tech building. As we approached the modern glass and steel structure, I saw Julia taking it in with new eyes. "This is your garage space?" she asked, clearly surprised by the scale. "We outgrew the garage about 5 years ago," I replied with a small smile. Inside, I gave her a tour of our development labs, testing facilities, and collaborative workspaces. I showed her prototypes of our latest adaptive technologies, explaining how each was designed to address specific accessibility challenges. "This is our pride and joy at the moment," I said, demonstrating a sleek headset with neural sensors. It allows people with limited mobility to control digital interfaces using only their thoughts. The technology has applications beyond accessibility too, which is partly why Pinnacle was interested in the partnership. Julia listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed both her business acumen and her genuine interest. As we concluded the tour in my office, she stopped in front of the wall of user feedback. "Access Tech gave me back my independence," she read from one letter. "For the first time in 15 years, I can work again without assistance." She turned to me, her eyes shining with what looked like unshed tears. "This is what you do, Abby. You change lives." I nodded, suddenly emotional myself. "That's the goal." "And I reduced it to fixing computers for people who aren't tech-savvy," she said, shaking her head in dismay. "I am so sorry." "Why, Julia?" I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. Why has it always been a competition between us? Julia sank into a chair, looking out at the Milwaukee skyline through my office windows. "I've been asking myself the same question since the party. I think it goes back to when we were kids. You were always the smart one, the one with the big ideas and the determination to make them happen. You were smart too, Julia. You still are, but in different ways," she acknowledged. You were building circuit boards while I was building social networks. You solved problems. I navigated people. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that your kind of intelligence was the kind that mattered more. So I tried to compete on your terms, and when I couldn't, I tried to diminish your achievements instead. Her honesty was disarming. This wasn't the defensive, competitive Julia I was used to. This was someone engaged in genuine self-reflection. I've been thinking about that science fair in 8th grade, she continued. Your water filtration system versus my baking soda volcano. I smiled at the memory. You got more attention. But you got the blue ribbon, she countered. And I was so jealous. Not just of the ribbon, but of how you didn't seem to need the attention. You were satisfied with creating something that worked, something that mattered. I've never had that kind of internal validation. We talked for hours, unraveling years of misunderstandings and competitive patterns. Julia shared how our parents' constant comparisons had shaped her view of herself in relation to me. I admitted that my withdrawal had probably contributed to the distance between us, that I had given up on trying to have a genuine relationship rather than continuing to make the effort. As evening fell, casting long shadows across my office, Julia asked, Do you think we can start over? Not forget the past, but maybe build something different going forward. I'd like to try, I said sincerely, but it has to be based on who we really are, not who we think the other wants us to be. Julia nodded, a genuine smile spreading across her face. I'd like to get to know my sister, the innovative CEO who's changing lives with accessible technology. And I'd like to know my sister, the strategic thinker who navigates complex corporate environments, I replied with an answering smile. 6 months later, I stood backstage at the Pinnacle Technology Conference preparing to deliver the keynote address on the future of accessible technology. Julia waited with me, no longer working for Pinnacle, but for a smaller firm where, in her words, the culture better aligns with my values. The holiday party incident had prompted her to reevaluate not just our relationship, but her career path as well. After several frank conversations with her boss, she had realized that the competitive, often cutthroat environment at Pinnacle was bringing out her worst qualities. Her new position at a women-led technology consultancy offered fewer status symbols, but greater satisfaction and a healthier work culture. Nervous? She asked, straightening my blazer with a sisterly touch. A little, I admitted. Public speaking isn't my natural habitat. You'll be amazing, she assured me. Just talk about the work the way you talked to me that day in your office. The passion comes through. As I stepped onto the stage to address the audience of industry leaders and developers, I caught sight of Julia giving me a thumbs up from the wings. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and we still had moments of falling into old patterns. But we were making progress, learning to see and appreciate each other for who we really were, rather than through the distorted lens of competition. In the end, that was the most meaningful success of all. The thunderous applause following my keynote speech at the Pinnacle Technology Conference still echoed in my ears as I stepped off the stage. Julia was the first to greet me, wrapping me in a genuine hug. You knocked it out of the park, Abby, she beamed. Did you see Frederick Spencer nodding along when you talked about integrating adaptive technologies from the design phase? You've got him completely convinced. I laughed, feeling light with relief and accomplishment. Let's hope so. The more companies that build accessibility into their development process, the closer we get to truly inclusive technology. We made our way to the reception area where conference attendees were gathering for the networking session. Several people approached to congratulate me on the speech, including Catherine Simmons, who had become a valuable ally within Pinnacle. Abigail, that was exactly the message our development team needed to hear, she said warmly. And Julia, how lovely to see you again. How's the new position treating you? It's challenging in all the right ways, Julia replied with genuine enthusiasm. I'm learning to measure success differently, focusing on impact rather than just advancement. As Catherine moved on to greet other guests, Julia leaned closer to me. 6 months ago, I would have been jealous of you being the center of attention like this. Now I'm just proud. It's a strange feeling, but a good one. Her candor touched me deeply. We had spent the past 6 months rebuilding our relationship, meeting regularly for coffee or dinner, even collaborating on a small project where Julia's firm had consulted on the marketing strategy for Access Tech's newest product line. Each interaction had been a step toward a healthier dynamic, but this moment of genuine pride from Julia felt like a breakthrough. "Thank you for being here today," I said sincerely. "It means a lot." "Where else would I be for my sister's big moment?" she replied, squeezing my arm affectionately. As we mingled with the conference attendees, I was struck by how differently Julia interacted with people now compared to the holiday party. Gone was the constant self-promotion and status signaling. Instead, she listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in the conversations, rather than looking for opportunities to elevate herself. Later, as we shared a quiet dinner after the conference events had concluded, I broached a subject that had been on my mind. "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad," I began cautiously. "We should visit them together soon. It's been a while since we've both been home at the same time." Julia nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like that. Maybe we could even tell them about our companies collaborating. Dad always said we'd make a good team if we ever stopped competing long enough to work together." "He did, didn't he? I'd forgotten that." "There's a lot I think we both chose to forget or ignore over the years," Julia said, her expression turning reflective. "Like how Mom always pushed me toward more visible achievements because she thought I needed the external validation, while she encouraged your independent streak because she knew you were more internally motivated." I considered this perspective, which Julia had never shared before. "You think Mom was trying to support our different personalities rather than playing favorites?" "I've been seeing a therapist," Julia admitted. "Part of my post-holiday party self-improvement plan. She's helped me recognize some patterns in how I interpret past events. I always assumed Mom favored you because you were smarter, but looking back, I think she was just trying to parent us according to our different needs. This reframing of our childhood opened up a new avenue of healing for both of us." Over dessert, we shared memories comparing our different perceptions of the same events, and finding that the truth often lay somewhere in the middle of our experiences. "Do you remember that career day in high school?" Julia asked. "When I said I wanted to be a CEO and you said you wanted to be an engineer." I nodded, smiling at the memory. "Dad joked that we should start a company together. And here we are, a CEO and a strategic consultant finally collaborating instead of competing," Julia mused. "It only took us 20 years to follow his advice." The evening ended with plans for a joint visit to our parents and a commitment to monthly sister dinners regardless of our busy schedules. As we parted ways outside the restaurant, Julia hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry it took something as dramatic as the holiday party fiasco for me to see what I was doing," she said. "But I'm grateful for where we are now." "Me too," I replied honestly. "Sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most important growth." In the months that followed, our relationship continued to strengthen. Julia visited Access Tech regularly, taking a genuine interest in our projects and even offering valuable insights from her business perspective. I attended events at her new company, supporting her as she built a reputation based on substance rather than self-promotion. The holiday season arrived again, and with it came another corporate party, this time at Julia's new firm. She had specifically requested that I attend as her guest of honor. "No hidden CEOs this time, I promise," she joked when she extended the invitation. "Just a chance to celebrate together." The contrast between this event and last year's pinnacle party couldn't have been more striking. Julia introduced me proudly to her colleagues, accurately describing Access Tech's work and our recent achievements. She seemed comfortable in her own skin, no longer needing to diminish others to feel successful. During the evening, Julia's new boss raised a toast to the team's accomplishments over the past year. When she specifically mentioned Julia's contribution to their recent client acquisition strategy, I felt a surge of genuine pride for my sister. The recognition was well-deserved based on actual achievements rather than self-promotion. Later, as we stood by the window overlooking the city lights, Julia reflected on her journey. "You know, losing that promotion at Pinnacle was the best thing that ever happened to me professionally. It forced me to reevaluate what success really means." "And what does it mean to you now?" I asked. "Doing work that matters," she replied without hesitation. "Building relationships based on mutual respect. Finding satisfaction in the process, not just the outcome." She smiled at me. "All things you seem to understand intuitively while I was busy chasing external validation." "We all find our own path," I said gently. "The important thing is that we support each other along the way." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the remarkable transformation in our relationship over the past year. From the humiliation and revelation of the Pinnacle holiday party to the genuine connection we now shared, the journey had been challenging but immeasurably rewarding. Success, I had learned, wasn't just about building a thriving company or securing multi-million-dollar partnerships. It was about creating space for authentic relationships, supporting others in their growth, and finding freedom from the need for external validation. True success included the ability to celebrate others' achievements without feeling diminished by them. Julia had finally learned that lesson too, finding greater fulfillment in a role that aligned with her values than in the prestigious position she had once so desperately pursued. By stepping away from the constant competition that had defined our relationship for decades, we had both found something more valuable than any professional achievement, a genuine sisterhood based on mutual respect and support. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone lit up with a text from Julia. "Thanks for coming tonight. Love having my sister in my corner." I smiled, typing a reply, "Always. That's what sisters are for." Have you ever experienced a moment of truth like this in your own life? A time when someone who underestimated you was forced to see your true value? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this tale of sisterly redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over family drama. Remember that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't a loud comeback, but simply standing in your truth and letting your accomplishments speak for themselves. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep shining your light, no matter who tries to dim it.